All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Peter Crew. I'm the Director of Cultural Affairs and Special Events for the City of Lowell. We are launching a sort of a new plan tonight and to try to help organizations that are interested in doing festivals and events in Lowell get information a little bit earlier and a little bit more available in order to help, because our job is basically really to help set you guys up for success in terms of doing events and activities in Lowell. And that's really what our department is here to do. So what we're going to do tonight is talk through some of what that permitting process looks like, how that goes about. But of course, I know most of you are here primarily because you want to hear about the American Rescue Plan or ARPA spending. We are very fortunate to have Brendan Flynn, the ARPA manager, here with us. He's going to have to go to the council meeting, so we're going to dive right in and talk about ARPA spending first. What we can tell you tonight is that ARPA funding for festivals and events is going to be continuing into 2023, which we're very excited about. We know it had a huge impact on events and festivals in 2022, and we're looking forward to continuing that into the next year. What we can also tell you right now is that ARPA funding right now is guaranteed that it will be approved, be available for city funding, city services like we were doing in 2022. So if you need to close roads, if you need a police detail, things like that are the kind of things that ARPA funding is going to be available for going into 2023. The process will be much the same in terms of how that works. Case will work directly with festival producers and city departments to facilitate ARPA funding. Beyond that, there is no other concrete plans right now for other ARPA funding that might be available in terms of what that looks like. But if and when projects do become available, of course, we will make sure you guys are in the loop about that. So while we have Brendan, I do want to open that questions about ARPA right up to the group and let folks ask any questions you have about how ARPA funding for festivals works, what it can be used for, anything like that. And if there are no questions, this will be a really quick section. Chris.
Given that my festival's at the beginning of the year, it's not a concern, but is there like a first come, first serve, or is there a pot that you think will last throughout the entire year for the amount of festivals that there are?
Sure. So,
do you want me to jump in? Or?
Please.
Yeah, why don't I mention? So, for those of you who have never met, my name is Brendan Flynn. I'm the ARPA Finance Manager for the city. And Chris, to your question, we're working out that sort of structure for how we're going to get funding out to people in the next probably month, I would say. A little backdrop, I guess. For the past couple months, once we announced the plan to the city back in October, we've been talking with different department heads about their needs, and with Peter and the case group, I'll stop and I'll apologize. I'm getting over a cold, so my voice may just like that. I'm on cue. So within that plan, there's $1.5 million set aside specifically for the arts, festivals, initiatives in the city, under sort of the auspices of the most negatively impacted groups, being, for businesses, it's like your arts community, your hotel community, tourism. So all of those different entities experience some, significant revenue loss or other sort of just issues from the pandemic, and this funding is being set aside to help those agencies, communities recover from the pandemic itself. So once that plan is formalized, we will announce sort of how the bucket's going to be broken out and what would be eligible. To give you sort of a framework for what that would look like, any money that's going to be spent related to ARPA, the Treasury requires that it sort of meets a two-part sort of structure. One, you have to identify what the need is. So what is it that you're spending this money on? What is the need that's being addressed by spending this money? And then secondly is, what are the objectives you plan to get by spending this money? So that component, think of that in the back of your head as you're sort of, once funding becomes available and you know what it is that you'd like to, request funding for, keep that in the back of your mind. What is it that you want to spend this money on? What is it addressing? What is the negative impact that your business, your festival, or if it's like an arts installation or some sort of arts program in the city, what was affected by it, and then how do you plan on using this money to address those issues? We don't know exactly how much funding is going to be. It's not going to be a set figure, I don't think. It won't be like, individual awards of $5,000. I think it's going to be based on what the community thinks you need. And then we would sort of evaluate that response and then come up with what we think would be a fair award to give you. So my apologies. This is tough. Before we go into anything else, does everyone know what the American Rescue Plan Act is? Because I've seen some faces here, some people that have been in these meetings in the past. So the American Rescue Plan, at like the 50,000 foot level, is a massive $1.9 trillion program issued by the government to help everybody recover from the pandemic. Out of that 1.9, 350 billion was designated to go to states, cities, towns, and tribal governments to help them and give them funds to actually manage and work through the recovery with their citizens and with their business community and you folks, the arts community. Out of that pot of money, Lowell got $76 million.
Wow.
So that's the amount of money that we're talking about, and we're using it across a bunch of different initiatives. The manager's plan covers things like social impact programming, economic development. We're working with the fire department to replace a bunch of very old apparatus that they're long overdue in replacing. Continuing to support the public health department's response to the pandemic, trying to alleviate or mitigate the spread of COVID-19 or any other, for that matter, any other sort of, whether it's the flu, RSV, other issues as well. It's also money that's being used for water and sewer infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, and then there's a component for premium pay for essential workers, and then revenue replacement for the city, which is kind of mundane. But I think for this group, what you'd be focusing on is what we consider to be your negative economic impacts. How did the pandemic affect you, your business, your community, and then how can we use this money to sort of jumpstart or get you back on your feet, improve your program so that going forward, you're in a better place than you were before the pandemic started. So, long answer, but there you go. Yes.
Thank you, and I feel terrible about making you talk more.
That's okay. I'm going to be doing a lot of it in about 30 minutes.
Okay. You offhandedly mentioned in your explanation to Chris that there may be funding available for things that are not directly events. You said art installations or,
That is our
temporary or permanent public art. So the hope is that there might be options to apply for ARPA funding towards things that are not strictly events.
correct.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
That is our hope that we do that. And under the auspices of getting people outside, getting people either downtown or to that area to actually see what the city has to offer, right?
Great.
So,
Thank you.
does anyone have any other questions? Yes.
I have a question. It's really regarding infrastructure. So will this money also be available to fix up some of the lighting in the parks? So for example, there are areas that are darker or that need paving, there are holes in there that people can,
Like paving isn't like potholes and stuff? Or-
Not holes per se, but like infrastructure wise, there's some lighting. For
Okay.
example, North Common Park,
Yep.
there are some areas that is lit up, but some areas that have the infrastructure in, but there's no lights.
Okay.
So
So the Department of Development and Planning, they're actually working with the city council members to come up with sort of a plan of projects throughout the city that are going to be primarily focused on green spaces. So the things like parks that you talk about, trying to improve parks, improve the lighting in the parks so that they're safer, so more people would be more comfortable to be there in the later, early evening or, evening hours, and feeling a bit more secure. That plus a bunch of other initiatives as well. Right now, we can't use ARPA funding to address things like potholes, which I think everyone would love to do. There isn't enough money, unfortunately, to do that. But You don't know what's going to change because Congress has, I guess, passed something at the end of December to expand what's eligible, and we're waiting to find out what actually that means. So there could be some changes to what ARPA could actually cover. So, yes.
So this money, is it only available through the end of the fiscal year, the federal fiscal year, or through the calendar year?
That's a good question. So ARPA money is available through the end of 2026. The catch is, the city needs to let the Treasury know by the end of 2024 how we're going to spend it. So if I commit to Howard that I'm going to give him $1 million to build an art installation, as an example,
I like that example.
he has to deliver by the end of 26. Otherwise, the city has to give back whatever he doesn't spend. So those are the two timelines that you have to keep in mind. We have to know what we're going to spend it on by the end of 24 and spend it by the end of 26. Yes, sir, in the back?
Some of them would be spent on maintenance of current arts things like sculptures and the lights in the canal that don't work anymore.
That could very well be, yes. I don't know the details of what like that plan looks like, but that would definitely be considered an eligible expense as well. Yes.
If we have to know what we're spending it on by 2024, can we spend it, is that money going to go out before 2024 or only after?
No, it'll go out before. My goal, to be honest, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. So if I can get all this money out the door and report it to the Treasury before the end of December 24, then my job is done. There's nothing left to do other than wait for them to come back and audit us. So yeah, the goal is to try to get it out into the community as quickly as possible, to spend it as quickly as possible. And one last thing that I'll mention, which, people have known about this for a while, it takes a while to make sure that whatever programming we put in place falls within the guidelines of the Treasury. Because if we go outside of those guidelines and we go awry, they may actually ask us to pay that money back. So again, with Howard's art installation, if he doesn't do that, it turns out, or he uses it on some other expense, then the city's on the hook for the $1 million we gave him. So.
When
There you go.
when is the funding available?
So there's going to be a few things we're announcing at City Hall tonight, which is not related to CASE. So if you want to be part of that, you're more than welcome to be in there. But with the CASE projects, I think that's going to be probably within a month or so as we'll have the details finalized. So my hope is we have something, say by early mid-March, maybe, and if not, definitely by early April. Yes.
Is this money, when you give this money to people, is it paid like CDBG way you have to produce a receipt or?
Most of these are going to be in that format, yes, because we need to be able to verify that what you spent the money on actually is what was within your proposal. That being said, we are looking at how we might be able to fund other things that are maybe a grant award or some sort of like milestone award where you'd get some funding up front and then you meet a certain amount of milestones and then you get a second tranche of funding and so forth. But we haven't quite worked through those details yet. Yes, sir.
There are some consequences due to the COVID, like delay in materials and the impact. In on Central Street, to build a bridge, which is affecting all the business in the street. Now, how do we recover? How can this help us recover from the foot traffic that we're using, the impact of the business? A lot of businesses are always closing.
Yep.
And this is due to somehow COVID related
Oh, sure. Yeah.
design. And so how do we tap into this to recover from the lack of business?
So I would say the particular funding we're talking about with CASE wouldn't be applicable. There are, part of what's being announced tonight are grants that are related for small businesses to help them recover. And those specifics, DPD will most likely talk about. I don't want to steal their thunder, but I want to say there's another 1.5 million set aside to help businesses with that, with those efforts.
City Council.
At City Council meeting, which is at 6:30, and I don't know at what point during the agenda we'll get there, but I would imagine it'll be sometime tonight. Yes, sir.
Yes, if you were a working artist with a studio
Yep.
in a commercial setting, and downtown. And you wanted to run a educational program that's architectural in terms of perspective. And you want to take classes out, on air, do the paintings on the sidewalk, looking at the structures.
Okay.
Would that be something you'd be interested in?
I would say that would be, and that would be for Peter to decide, but something along those lines would actually fit within the ARPA funding, correct? Because again, it's helping you as a small business expand your exposure within the city. You're also providing a service and an educational opportunity to other people. So it fits within sort of the realm of what would be considered eligible.
I'm presently a tenant at the Gates Building, have been here for 8 years, and I have a large studio. We turn that into a public forum on the rainy days, so the classes wouldn't be disturbed. Good weather days, approach spring and summer certainly, in the fall.
Yep.
I see so few people out plenty of painting in the city of Lowell as a group. And I do it in small cities like Concord and Bedford and places like that, across crowds.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I would say one other thing to add to that would be doing something outdoors was strongly encouraged for schools and getting schools to reopen. Some schools, like for instance, I live in Lowell and right down the street from me is Lowell Catholic. They actually had classes outdoors during the winter. They had them in these large, almost like circus tents, where they would have 30 or 40 kids in a space that could easily hold 150. And the idea was get them outside. Granted, they're wearing coats and so forth, but they're in an outside space, well ventilated, doing something plein air, outdoors, in an open space. You know, you're getting the freshest air you can. Like that would be something else that would fall under sort of mitigating COVID. So it's an additional sort of thing to add in your what it is that I want to use this money for and why.
I was at plenty of paint in the town of Kennebunkport. My corporation is located up there. It's on hold for the moment. I'm from Lowell. I know that school that you were talking about. It used to be next to St. Margaret's School.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
I come from the Highlands in Island Park.
Okay.
So I'm very familiar with the city. And I'd like to bring something of myself to that program.
I think that'd be great.
Write it up and submit it.
Yep.
How and when.
So I guess to add to that, like when these things, when we get to the point where we want to announce them, what do you think that mechanism is?
So we're sort of modeling our approach on the nonprofit side to similarly what DPW or DPD is doing on the for-profit side. So there will be an application process that goes out. Now, are you a register? Are you incorporated at all, or do you just function as an
I have a business license with the city of Lowell.
Okay, you do.
I'm registered with the state. I'm registered, my corporation is registered in the state of Maine. That's another entity. I raised a ton of money and gave it all to the school systems and Kennebunkport through the years. I let the VFW folks do all the sales, particularly painting that was very popular, signed by 2 presidents and 2 presidents.
Sure. So that's great because it also, if you're registered as an LLC, that also opens up opportunities for you on the for-profit grant cycle as well. So I would pay attention to what's happening at the council meeting later tonight, or what the information DPD will be putting out as well, in terms of what that looks like.
Did you just say you recommend attending the council?
Or you can always watch it tomorrow. Yeah, because if you're registered as an LLC, then your situation is a little bit different. This funding is primarily looking at the nonprofit sector and the festival and events and that kind of thing. It's going to be a whole different set of programs that's set up for the for-profit sector.
I don't sell much, I give it away.
Okay.
So I'm a nonprofit in that sense. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Yes, so I'm just wondering if this funding is geared towards the organizations, non-profit organizations that have been here, or any startup, someone who is also
I missed the last half of that because people walked by.
Yes, I was just wondering if the funding is geared towards the organization that are existing
Mhm.
or anyone who want to start up a small business or any non-profit organization is also eligible.
So the preference would be existing entities. Because again, the idea is that this is funding meant to help those existing entities recover. I believe that there are other avenues and opportunities for funding for folks that would like to start a new business. And whether or not we could somehow work that into this plan, I think is sort of maybe a secondary kind of conversation. I think our focus is going to be on existing businesses, existing nonprofits, existing, artisans and people in the arts community with this funding in particular.
Is there any cap to that, like 2 years up or
As far as what, addressing new businesses?
as far as the existing of the business or the non-profit?
I guess.
How long did you have to be in business to be considered existing?
I believe, I don't know the answer to that. That would be something we'd have to find out, and we could probably make sure that that somehow gets included in whatever we put out there as far as like, as a requirement of the RFP. Thank you.
believe, and I don't quote me on this, but I believe PBD is using January 1, 2021 as sort of a,
Okay.
as sort of a benchmark.
That's right, actually.
So we've got time for one or two more ARPA questions before we have to let Brendan go.
Is this funding specifically for registered nonprofits, or some artists are not registered as nonprofit organizations?
I'll defer to Peter on that.
Sure, so the idea with this funding is primarily will go either to 501c3s, or if you're affiliated with like a festival or an organization that works with the fiscal agent, for instance, that will also be opened up. We have not really explored granting directly to specific artists. We're focused primarily on organizations right now, but you don't have to be registered 501c3 if you have a designated fiscal agent.
501c3s could be the fiscal agents for that.
Correct. Right, yeah, if you're, that would be an avenue to explore, absolutely.
Yep. Yes, sir.
I probably missed this part, but how much fund set aside for this particular?
So for the festivals or for the case efforts is 1.5 million, I think is what this is.
Yeah, but that,
And it's going to be broken into sort of different categories. So it's not all one pot for one thing. I believe that they're going to be broken out into multiple different sort of buckets, for lack of a better term.
Got it. Thank you.
All right.
all right.
Thank you. I'm going to run. And again, if you want to hear more about what's going on with this, the council meeting will be going on. So, thank you.
Peter, if people are going to peel off to go to the city council meeting, before everyone peels off, I just kind of wanted to know if we could go around and see what festival each person.
Oh,
Yeah. Just because that. Thank you.
those guys, I think you're supposed to say this.
Well, we lost it.
All right, folks, we're going to continue on with the rest of the night if you're sticking around. Otherwise, we'll see you in the.
Hello. I'm not going to watch it. I know me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not sticking around, please clear the room. Next, we're going to talk about sort of the process. You can come in. All right, so thanks, folks. for sticking around. This portion of the evening will talk mostly about the permitting process and what cases role plays in that and how that goes through. And then we'll leave some time at the end if anybody's got general questions. So for anybody who's not familiar with the Office of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, we're located right downstairs in room 7. And we should be really the first place anybody comes to if they're interested in doing any kind of festivals or events in the city, even if it's a block party, parade, any kind of event. Come to our office first because we'll be the best in order to help you set up for success with those events. And one of the things we really want to stress through this process is planning ahead in advance. If you're looking at things like block parties, roads, basically anything where you're anticipating a crowd of 500 people or less, we really want to know and start talking about those events a minimum of 2 months before they happen in order to make sure that we have enough time to make sure city services are prepared for what's going on. There's nothing else majorly going on that may affect your ability to do events. So the sooner you sort of know about when you want to do things, let us know about it. And certainly if you're looking at events that are likely to attract more than 500 people, we really want to start having those conversations a minimum of 6 months before the events are scheduled to happen, and so that we can best set you up for success. And we have a great team in case, and we try really hard, but we do want to stress too that we cannot guarantee approval if we don't get permitting applications in a sufficient time in terms of how that works. What we talked about already. Next, I want to just touch briefly and sort of help refresh everybody's memory on what the application requirements look like. They're all up on the board here. But you can really help set yourselves up for success early on in the application process if when you're coming into us, you're turning in things like who your primary contact person is, where you want to do the event. Big things like if you want to serve alcohol or if you're going to be closing a road. And if you're planning to close roads for events, turning in a map of where you want to close roads when you turn in the application is hugely helpful for us. And it can be something really as simple as like a print off of a Google map with a highlighter on it. And that'll do the trick for us in terms of what that looks like. But the more information you can turn in with your application process, the faster we're going to be able to turn around your application and the better you're going to be set up in terms of how your event is going to get out of the gate and what that looks like. Depending on what you're doing too, there are going to, you can go to the next slide. There are going to be some additional permissions that are required in terms of what that is and what that looks like. Certainly if you're planning to serve food or beverages at the event, you're going to want to talk to development services. We can help facilitate that conversation. And it really varies depending on what you're trying to do. If it's a local food truck, it may be very little you have to do. If you're planning to like set up grills and cook and do that kind of thing, there are a few more processes that are involved with that as well. And of course, if you're planning to seek like a one-day license to serve alcohol at the event, there's the extra step of having to go through the Liquor Commission to do that as well. But they meet at least generally twice a month, and it's relatively easy to get on that schedule. And if you want to do something at a city park, for instance, like if you want to do something over at Lucy Larkham or one of the North Common or South Common, you also need approval from the parks, the Board of Parks, to go through that as well. And we can help facilitate introducing you to those folks, but those are all things that you want to keep in mind if you are planning to do an event in Lowell. And really anything that where you're looking at either amplified music or amplified sound, you need an additional permit for that, which can also be done through the License Commission in terms of how that works. And there are certain events in Lowell where you don't need a permit. Basically, if what you're planning to do is on private property and it doesn't involve any kind of amplified music, any street closers, any additional sort of electrical hookups or things like that, there may be instances where you actually don't need any special permitting for that. And we can talk you through that as well in terms of what that looks like. That is sort of the general list of the things that are exempt from permitting, but yes.
Since you bring that up, is there any indoor city-owned locations that events can happen?
Technically, and I'm sort of glad Pete Lally's here, technically, the only indoor facility where events do happen is LMA. LMA, of course, is managed by the Lowell Management Group, so you'd have to technically go through them in terms of renting the facility, but so it's a city-owned building, but it's managed by a private entity, so you'd want to go through LMA if you want to do something like that. But otherwise, the city doesn't really have any indoor space that we own for events. The other thing I'm sure many of you are aware of is that there are quite a number of different jurisdictions within the city of Lowell. It's really a patchwork of national park property, city-owned property, private property, property that's owned by the state Department of Parks and Conservation. And depending on where you want to do an event, in addition to city permissions, you may also need permissions from one of the other entities that we work with. Boarding House Park is an excellent example. That's owned by the National Park Service, so you need additional permits and approvals from the Park Service if you want to do an event over at Boarding House Park. Sambus Pavilion and the Esplanade, that's another one we get questions about all the time, and that is official state park, and you need permission from the Department of Conservation and Recreation in order to do events over there. CASE can help facilitate those conversations, and obviously if you're planning to do an event over there and want to close either part of Pawtucket Boulevard or use the parks across the street for parking, those are city-owned, so there are multiple sort of partners involved in times like that. But important to remember when looking to do events in Lowell that there are a lot of different jurisdictions. So coming to us early can help point you in which kind of other departments or other organizations you may need to talk to in terms of doing events in Lowell and what that looks like. There are a series of fees that are involved between Lowell. Fortunately, we keep the burden of fees in Lowell very, very low. Your special event permitting fee is only $25, and there's a $75 fee for street closures. But it's important to note that those special event and street closure fees don't include costs of paying for things like police detail, fire detail, anything like that. You're going to be billed separately for those unless your program is currently ARPA eligible, in which case we may be able to step in and cover things like that. But certainly once the ARPA program sunsets, we'll be back into the world of billing people directly for police details and city services needed to do events. Roberto has been very good about providing festivals sort of with the costs of things that have been covered by ARPA, so as that program begins to sunset, you should be set up with what those kind of costs are likely to look at going forward in terms of what that is. And because this is City of Lowell and how we're set up, we can currently only accept either checks or money orders as you're coming in to pay for those kind of fees and services and what that looks like. Hopefully that will change eventually, but right now everything must be submitted by either check or money order. And since we've already covered the ARPA portion, that's really sort of doing events in a nutshell. Steve.
Back to the ARPA funding again, didn't Big Guess this question earlier, is that funding for a particular project? Is it a percentage of the total that ARPA might fund, or is there potential for the ARPA to fund the entire effort? Is there any thinking about that yet?
So a little bit of both. Basically, the main core concept with ARPA is we don't want to fund anything that ARPA is either funding things to get organizations back to where they were pre-COVID, or we're looking to sort of fund things in a launch kind of capacity. Because we want to make sure if we're launching something new that it's able to continue once the ARPA funding is no longer available. So we don't want to get into a series of funding programs that are likely not to be able to continue once the ARPA funding is no longer available. That's what that looks like. And part of what we also wanted to do with tonight is, and certainly encourage folks to get in touch with us as soon as possible once you start locking in dates, because we really want to sort of build out what that whole calendar looks like for the year and what that is. Other questions? Chris?
I actually was wondering, is there a possibility for the city to support kind of peer-to-peer sharing, more meetings amongst folks who do festivals to talk about common challenges or ways we can tackle challenges together? I'd love to know more about how other festivals are operating.
Sure. I mean, open that up to sort of the group. Is that something that a wider group would be interested in if we are able to sort of set up a few?
I think that's a good idea because I'm part of Butcher, the Indian festival that we do every year. And every year it's the same thing. It's like we have to hire a state police or the city police, and they're always fighting. And they're like, no, you have to have us. You have to have us. And we get stuck. And it's like, who do we hire? And like fine, we'll just work out both of them at this point. But that's a struggle, because they cost a lot of money.
Right. Exactly. No, that's great.
I'd like to do that, is to find out where the struggles are, because we've been doing it for 6 years. It's a struggle.
Okay. Great. Yeah, no, we can definitely start to sort of facilitate some regular check-ins for folks. So that's, glad you brought that up, Chris. Other questions?
Peter, are these slides on your website or?
They will be available. And if you haven't picked one up, I strongly suggest everybody take a copy of the special event guide. All of this information is spelled out much more thoroughly in the guide. So,
Right. Very much.
other questions? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming tonight, and we're looking forward to working with you this year.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming, Bonnie.